It is a rather cold, cloudy, overcast August New England morning here, and it's rather fitting considering that I'm talking to a man about a game that is kind of sad. Today I'll be talking with Mr. Will O'Neill. Mr. O'Neill, it is a pleasure to be talking with you.
It's a pleasure to be talking with you. Thanks very much for the introduction. I wish it was a cold and rainy day here in Toronto, but I'm afraid the sky is full of actual sunlight, and it's
Uh,
gorgeous and warm, and we're at the peak of summer. So yeah, so not really fitting, but what can you do?
well, it's fitting over here. That's the best we
Yes,
can get, you know. But
exactly. That's good.
Well, Mr. O'Neill, it is a pleasure to be chatting with you. Now, I played your game Actual Sunlight on PC, and recently you just brought it over to Vita. Could you tell the folks at home what Actual Sunlight is like?
So, Actual Sunlight is a short interactive story about love, depression, and the corporation. It's a very narrative focused game. Most of it's really presented in text. Essentially, you control a character named Evan Winter, and you just kind of go around his apartment, you go to his job, and you just kind of learn more about his life and who he is through interacting with objects that you see on the screen. So, for example, you might see his refrigerator in his apartment, and you interact with the refrigerator, and you learn about his thoughts on, being overweight or eating or his lifestyle. And every object you interact with has some sort of thematic or conceptual tie to the text that's then presented to you. And the whole game really is just sort of a character study and learning about him and going through his story and finding out sort of what happens to him as when it jumps off.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So now, what made you want to make a game like Actual Sunlight? It's not every day you run across a video game with a protagonist who is quite clearly depressed.
No, I mean it's an absolutely autobiographical game. I mean my biggest motivation doing it was wanting to represent the kinds of things that I'd been through in a way that I felt was really raw and realistic. Like when I look at sort of what a Hollywood narrative of a story like Actual Sunlight would be, it would end with Evan being like, "Well, I'm just going to get out there and start exercising, and I'm going to meet, a manic pixie dream girl in a graveyard, and everything's going to be okay because deep down inside, I'm a great guy." Like, and it's just not realistic. It's not to say that everything is relentlessly negative in a life like mine, but I think art deserves the truth. And I wanted to present it in a realistic way. And to do so in the game medium was particularly compelling to me because it is a game that's very much about video game addiction and a sedentary lifestyle that reflects my own history and my own life as a gamer as well. And I really felt like it would connect with that audience in an interesting kind of way.
Wow. I absolutely hear you on that. So you have then suffered through some bouts of depression, I take it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something actually in the game. At a certain point, you're finding all about this Evan Winter character, and then there's also a point where sort of I kind of break the fourth wall and speak to sort of the audience or the player directly and talk a little bit more directly, personally about myself, even though the game is essentially autobiographical. I mean, it's something that I've struggled with since I was a teenager. And it's continued on into my adult life as well. But it's there's more to it than that too. I mean, it's about being depressed, but it's also about the life you live that is depressing, and the extent to which I think depression kind of compounds and perpetuates itself. Because to have that outlook on life maybe makes you make choices or go in directions that then makes your depression sink even further. It's very much a vicious cycle. But I didn't just want to make it about the condition of depression. I wanted it to make about as much about how life is depressing as it is to go through life with depression. Is the way I'd say
Right.
it.
Absolutely understand that. I think that's important because a lot of the time when we hear about characters who are depressed or we think about depressed characters in media, it seems that they are their depression, but not much else. They
Yeah.
kind of get objectified in a way. Just this character is very incarnate of depression and little more. So with your game, then you wanted to break past that essentially.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like I want to explore it as more than just an emotional state that makes someone morose or gloomy. And I think what a lot of people find really compelling about Actual Sunlight is the fact that like you start to sort of identify with not just this person being depressed, but why they're why they are depressed. A lot of people have said, it makes a very compelling case for depression. Like, you really feel like you are pulled into this guy's world, and even if it's not a viewpoint you necessarily share, you absolutely understand why he feels the way he does because of the way that he explains the way he's feeling. So that was what I want to capture. You're dead on with that. Like, I find it's too often just depicted as sort of like a state of emotional being, but there's rationales behind it. There's a perspective, and I wanted to take the player and really put them in the eyes of that perspective.
Very well said. Now, I noticed that with your game, you had an 18 plus warning at the beginning. Now, having played it, I haven't really seen much that would warrant it besides a bit of swearing within the game. Now, what made you want to put that sort of warning on your game Actual Sunlight?
Well, I just don't feel that it's appropriate for children. Not for the usual reasons we think of as, a quote unquote mature game, being sex or violence, that sort of thing. I just really didn't feel like kids should play it. To be honest, I don't really even think of somebody, in their early 20s or mid 20s to really be its key target audience. I really think it's something that will speak strongly to people late 20s, early 30s, as some sort of things in your life begin to solidify. But it is somewhat graphic, and it is very harsh, and I just don't think it's appropriate for children. I mean, even now for the Vita release, it has an ESRB rating of M17, and I absolutely agree with that. Like, there's probably some people who make a game and they're like, well, we don't want that M rating because it limits our audience. I enthusiastically embrace that rating from the ESRB. I think it's totally appropriate, and it's exactly what I want. I don't want kids or even really teenagers to play Actual Sunlight. I want them to play it later when they grow up.
I hear you on that. It's not too often that somebody will intentionally limit their audience. So, but for a game like Actual Sunlight, though, you do feel that it may be more appropriate. Then that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, I think I'm prepared to do a lot of things to preserve what I think is the artistic vision of the game. I mean, another thing about the Vita release is that it's not compatible with the PS TV, which some people have been asking for, because I just don't really think it's a game that you get the full impact of kind of sitting on a couch with a controller. I think sitting at a computer is kind of right for it, and the handheld aspect of it I really, truly, deeply love, because it can allow people to take it to a place that's sort of quiet and really meditative, and really experience it that way. So, no, I'm not compromising in what I want the game to be, and I have a really specific vision for what I think is the best way for people to experience it. And I think you have to commit to that.
Now that's also interesting because most developers, their first instinct is let's bring this to every platform out there, but you would rather see your game only on the platforms that you feel would best essentially serve its content.
Yeah, nothing would break my heart more after so many people having had such an impactful experience with the game, to put it out on a big sort of tabletop TV console and have people give it reviews like, oh, I just didn't really get it. Like, it seemed kind of long, and there's like a lot of reading, and I just kind of got bored and I did something else. Like, that would infuriate me, because I really feel, the writing's great, and it has the potential to speak to anybody if they're in the right frame of mind, and if I'm catching them in, yes, what I call a right state of play. So absolutely, it's far better to have a small audience that totally understands and totally knows where you're coming from, and loves it, than I think a much broader, muddier, less defined, less satisfied audience.
That makes total sense. Now, with regard to the development process, now,
Yeah.
first off, what sort of challenges did you encounter when making Actual Sunlight?
Well, the initial version was made in RPG Maker, and honestly, what was really great about it was that it allowed me to prototype and iterate the earliest version of it so easily. Like, it was an ideal tool, not only just because of the way it works, but because there was such a great community of freely available sort of open source scripts that allowed me to do things with it. And I think, like, honestly, I'm kind of good at that. Like, I have kind of a weird tinkery talent for cobbling together existing things and trying to make something good out of them. And of course, being fixated on the writing, I'm not really as concerned with what it looks or sounds like, or at least not initially in that kind of developmental phase. So that was an easy way for me to get over a hurdle that probably a lot of developers face, because they do care about the flow and the impact and how it looks, and gameplay elements. I get to skip all that, so that's a huge advantage for me. The challenges from there was just sort of making sure I got it right as I slowly added art and music into the mix. And then for the Vita release, that was really challenging. That involved basically remaking the game in Unity, and there I had the assistance of a really great tool in the Unity Asset Store called Adventure Creator. But from there, doing that and then getting it ready for Sony and their whole process, that was really challenging. Like I'd say, if you consider like putting an indie game on like itch.io, kind of like one tier, and then the challenge of putting it on something like Steam as being sort of an order of magnitude greater than that, I would say then going to put it on like a major console is an order of magnitude greater than that. So yeah, it was really challenging, but Sony was awesome. They're great, really supportive, and I had some friends help me out as well, and some little people for little jobs I hired. So yeah, you just get through it. Once I was determined to do it on the Vita, you just kind of do what you have to do, and I was in for a penny, so I was gonna make sure it got done no matter what.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of bringing your game on board the Sony PlayStation Vita with Sony?
There's not much that I know if I can say. I mean, it's a relatively kind of process that's straightforward. Yeah, but I mean, it's basically yeah, I mean, you port the game over. I don't know if I have as much perspective on it as people who are bringing a game that's brand new to it, right? Because I went to Sony and basically said, "Hey, I've got this thing. It's already out on Steam. It's already got some really great critical reception. I just want to bring it over to you guys." And thankfully they took a look at it and they really loved it. And so then that's sort of, I feel like I started sort of much later, probably in the process than you would have gone. But it's great, and it's just really about getting it done and just making sure it conforms to the specifications of whatever device you're dealing with.
Oh, very cool. Now, can you tell us a bit about your favorite part of developing Actual Sunlight?
I mean, the weirdness of it is it's this autobiographical game, right? And it's about depression, it's about suicide, it's all these things that are really serious, these things that have gone on in my life. Um, but then you put it out and people really respond to it in a really positive kind of way. So then it becomes this thing that's about the worst things in your life that has become one of the best things in your life, because you've really had the pleasure of creating something that resonated with so many people. So I guess just feeling that, like, I don't want to say like feeling understood in this sort of way, because that there's a lot of other people out there in the world who struggle the same way you do. Everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about, so it's not like it's shocking. But hearing from people about how the game affected them and how they felt about it was unquestionably like the most rewarding part of the experience, and it continues to be.
Now, I'm absolutely obligated to ask everybody this question. What is
All
your
right.
favorite game of all time?
Star Control 2 is my favorite game of all time. And I think a lot of people who are narrative focused, a lot of people who write games would put Star Control 2 somewhere in their top three. It's absolutely exceptional. The voice that those writers found for all the different alien races, the way they tied everything into the beautiful fabric of this story where everything's kind of interconnected. I mean, it's a typical sci-fi space adventure, but beneath the surface, my God, it's layered and amazing, and I don't think I'm capable of doing anything like it, nor will I ever be in my life. Like, it just blows me away how good it is. And then from there on, I get into other things a lot of writers like. I really love Silent Hill 2. I'd say that in some ways, atmospherically, that's was an inspiration for Actual Sunlight. And a lot of other stuff like that. A lot of writing focus, a lot of narrative focus stuff. But sorry, short answer: Star Control 2.
Very cool. Now, wait, now what sort of game is Star Control 2 for folks who haven't heard of it?
Okay, so Star Control 2. Yeah, I'm old. It came out in like the early to mid 90s. It was, it was an MS-DOS game originally. The good news is somebody revived it, and now you can go download it for free as the Urquan Masters. And it's basically like a space adventure exploration game. You're the captain of a single ship, and you arrive at Earth to find out that everything with the human race has gone awry. And from there, you have to travel around the cosmos, building an alliance to take down an evil alien superpower. And to say anything more would ruin it. But it's basically sort of like a cross between an adventure game, and it has a sort of action arcade starship fighting module as well. That's also a cool standalone game on its own. But yeah, everyone should go out and check out the Urquan Masters. You will never regret playing Star Control 2 in your life, I assure you. It is before the early 2000s when we were blown back into the dark ages of gaming narrative, when sort of that first generation of consoles came out and like first person shooters took over the world. Like prior to that, in the 90s, like you're too young a guy to know this era either, but like writing and narrative used to be so important to games. It used to be so central, and everything about it used to be so fantastic. So go back and get Star Control 2 and relive a little piece of that era.
Yeah, there are quite a few 90s narrative-focused games that are high on my list. I'm going to have to add Star Control. I'm also going to have to play Planescape Torment. I've heard very good things about that.
Planescape Torment is really, really good. Now, that's a lot of reading. That's the only thing about that one. I think there's a lot of good mod packs out there that make it a little more manageable. But Planescape Torment is excellent. I don't believe anybody's ever played it more than once, no matter what they say. It is huge and sprawling, and it's a lot of reading, man. But have a blast, because it's excellent as well.
Very cool. So now, what advice would you give to young developers who might want to make their own autobiographically focused games?
I mean, it's not. The thing is, I guess it's sort of a tempting target, because I understand that because you don't have to invest the same amount of work into necessarily gameplay elements and the rest of it. You need to appreciate that it is still sort of a whole artistic package, and that it might be more challenging than it looks. Not to say that it's unattainable, but don't underestimate it. And I think the other thing too is, if you want to be a good writer, if you want to do an autobiographical game in that kind of way, one, you have to write a lot, and two, you have to read a lot. I think that's often forgotten. Good writers read as much as they can. I wish I read more. I woefully underread, in my opinion, but I know how integral it is. I mean, to be honest with you, being a writer, in addition to being a developer, is really my day job. I mean, I work as a professional writer, copywriter, creative director, for banks and pharmaceutical companies, and I went to school for it. And in high school I wrote plays, and in elementary school I wrote short stories. So I don't want to make it seem daunting or impossible. But even though this is actually something that was like my first game, and this thing came out of nowhere, and who is this guy? I've been a professional writer for over 10 years, and it's the only line of work that I've ever seriously considered since I was a young child. So there's a lot of work to do catching up wise if you want to get there. I really think there's been too much of an emphasis in indie development now on just being quote unquote an indie dev, rather than recognizing it as the sum of its sort of interdisciplinary parts. I think rather than focusing on an indie dev, focus on being a great writer, a great programmer, a great artist, a great musician. Find a skill to excel at, and then collaborate with others who can work with you to create something really awesome.
That is excellent advice. Now, in particular for writers, are there any texts you would recommend taking a look at? For instance, personally, I recommend, even if you're not into comics, taking a look at Understanding Comics. It's a fantastic book, and even though it's primarily comics focused, the way that Understanding Comics talks about narrative, and the way that narrative fits around the design of whatever you're creating, be it comics or some other visual medium, it's very good for game designers, a lot of them have found. So is there anything that you would recommend?
I'm a big fan of the rudimentary stuff. I mean, I'd say there's a million books on your basic sort of 3-act monomyth type of structure. I think it's good to crawl, then walk, then run. I think if you can sit down and understand how a simple screenplay or a relatively straightforward plot in a 3-act play kind of works, that is hugely beneficial. I would say, maybe I'm on the outside with this, but I'd say go back and look at the fundamentals of narrative structure, completely devoid from any kind of game narrative or game development context. Start there, and I think you'll be happy with the results.
Very cool. Now, if you could go back and change any one thing during your development of Actual Sunlight, what would you change?
It's an interesting question. I feel like there's so much stuff in it that I took out that I'm glad I did. You know, even though it's not a long game, it only takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours for most people. That shorter version of it is so much better than the longer version was. Like, I really feel like I got rid of all the stuff that I should have gotten rid of. I can't think of too much that I would have left in that I didn't. I mean, I'd say maybe, more art might have helped, more music might have helped. Uh, but it's tough. I mean, I think there was the story of sort of Evan's relationship with Jackie for people who go on to play it originally, just to give some insight, is like was you originally much more fleshed out and sort of much more explained. But I eventually, once the whole thing was done, it's really once the whole thing is finished and you look at the whole package that I think you're really ready to start looking at what do I not need here? What can I actually take out? Because in a lot of ways, stuff that is just sort of suggested at can be more powerful than things that are explained outright. If you can express that things are obviously really emotionally impactful for people without totally explaining why, but they understand the general gist of context around it, I think to a certain extent they can bring their own experiences to bear on it, and it can make it that much more powerful. So yeah. So in fact, no. I'll say if I could do anything, I would do more of that. I would cut even more from actual sunlight. I would imply and state outright even less.
So it's kind of like that six-word story that nobody knows if Hemingway really wrote, Baby shoes,
Right.
for sale, never worn.
Sure.
I mean, you can get like
Yeah.
1,000 different things from that story, but a lot of people consider
Yeah.
it sad because of what it's implying, not of what exactly has been said.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I would hate to see like micro fiction uh, dominate our era completely, just because of social media and lowering attention spans. Like, I still think it's good to sit down and read something, that's a bit substantial. But I'm a big believer in Vonnegut. I mean, start as close to the end as possible. Everything you should do should either advance the plot or advance character. Like, nothing should be wasted. I'm really a big believer in that. But you should be telling enough of a story that hopefully it takes you a little more than 6 words. But yeah, I like short stories. I like novellas. It's I guess what I think of, probably I think the biggest sin in like overly long literature now is like the fantasy novels. Like I don't read fantasy sci-fi the way I did when I was younger, but I don't really understand why Game of Thrones has to be thousands of pages. Like, I don't really think it's necessary, or I doubt that it is. But I know I'm in the minority there. A lot of people really love it. I just think as little as possible. That's how I try to write and be.
I absolutely hear you on that. There's another phrase I heard. It was perfection. And now I'm horribly paraphrasing here, but perfection has not been achieved when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing more to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a huge thing that separates, writers. I think as they start out and as they mature, like as you go along, I think even though obviously if you play the game, you'll see that like working in an agency setting was really torturous in a lot of ways. It was also what really taught me to take a really disciplined, really spare approach to writing. That's where I really learned like you really don't need what you don't need. And it's a sign of maturity for a writer, I think, to be able to kind of kill your babies and throw it out and start over if you need to. A lot of people you talk to who are like, well, I don't want people editing my stuff, or everything's got to be in here. That's amateur hour. That's how you know, because nobody's perfect, and good writers write badly all the time. It's just you have to be honest with yourself. You got to be hard on yourself and know what to take out.
Very cool. Now, if you okay, now regarding actual sunlight, I know that your game shipped with quite a few warnings. Um, have you been at all concerned about what effect your game might have on people?
I think art has to exist and has to be free to explore every topic under the sun. And I think it's interesting that you get this kind of question about a game when really I don't feel like there are people wrapping up copies of The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I don't feel like there's anyone not selling, Pink Floyd's The Wall to people. Is art powerful? Does it have the power to influence people's thoughts? Absolutely, but it still needs to exist. And I think the warning that I give up front is really fair. And I think I've made it clear that if you're in a state of mind that is really severely negatively affected by it, or you're prone to it, I don't really want you to play it anyways, because I don't think you're going to get out of it what I intended anyone to get. But I don't think the answer is to simply say, well, there's some people who could be negatively affected by this, so it can't exist. We have to get rid of it. And I think that's less helpful. And I think in the long run, that's ultimately more harmful.
Yeah,
Than
pretending these
suppressing
things
it could
don't
ever be.
exist, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because then the issues never get talked
irresponsible.
about.
Yeah, I mean, it's about having a conversation about those issues, but I think it's really about speaking truth to power, man. Like, it's just, these are realistic experiences, and the problem is not that a game about it exists. The problem is that the things in it are true. That, those are the problems. It's not, it's not time to shoot the messenger. It's maybe time to look at the environment that's somewhat toxic that creates it.
That's very interesting stuff, Mr. O'Neill. So let's say somebody wants to play your game. Where can they get it?
They can pick it up on Steam or any of the other big online retailers, itch, Indie Game Stand, as well as Humble. That's the PC build. And on the Vita, you just turn on your Vita and you go on the Vita store, and it's available today.
Excellent.
And you check it out. You get links at actualsunlight.com. Everything you need is there.
Now, are you working on any new games?
Yeah, I've just announced my new game, Little Red Lie, which is a contemporary adventure game about debt, family, and the truth about honesty. So it's sort of like a Monkey Island style adventure game, where you would have like push, pull, pick up, look, all those sort of verbs that you then apply to the environment. Except in this game, you play two different characters, and the only verb you have is lie. So all you can do is lie. All you can do is experience things dishonestly. You lie about them. You lie to other people. You lie to people about things around you. But the two characters you play experience lying in a very different context, because one of them is kind of like this rich, relatively mean-spirited, evil, jerky person who's just lying and intimidating people to sort of get what he wants. And the other character is a woman who's sort of not nearly as wealthy, who's like older, taking care of her parents, in more sort of a vulnerable social position. And she really uses lying as a way of managing other people and sort of being the rock that the river flows around. So it's an interesting way to look at the sort of moral relativism of dishonesty. And it also is a cool setup and an innovative way to kind of experience an adventure game. And you can learn a little bit more about that and see a trailer and some screenshots at littleredlie.com.
Very cool. Now, is this game going to be as narratively focused as Actual Sunlight?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be mostly writing. I mean, I'm depicting it in a more 3D, more sophisticated looking world, but absolutely, the writing is always going to be the focus with anything I do. You can bet on that.
Very cool. Now, what inspired something like that?
Well, to me, it's really looking at kind of like the future and the baby boomer generation, and sort of the difficulties that I guess my generation and definitely your generation are kind of facing to find sort of like financial security and prosperity the way that baby boomer generation did. And it's sort of about as they begin to die essentially, and where does their wealth go? Does wealth continue to concentrate into the hands of fewer and fewer people? And how, I guess, do people who kind of were pitched a certain version of what the world was going to be like when they were growing up and kind of cultivated skills around that, around full-time employment, save for retirement, buy your first home, get a mortgage, all these things. And now they're finding themselves waking up in a world where those aren't the rules anymore. And how will they manage, as sort of the shield of their parents' money and in a greater social sense of the prosperous generation that came before them, how will they then survive? What is it that they will then do? So I'm going to be sort of looking at and exploring all those kinds of questions.
Very interesting. Now, I take it your audience for this one might be a little different from that for Actual Sunlight, or are you still aiming for the same age group?
I think it's broader. Yeah, I think it's a bigger audience. I think this is something that's more germane to more people. I mean, I think there's something for everyone in Actual Sunlight. I don't think you have to be depressed to appreciate it, but it might resonate more strongly with people who have gone through that or have people close to them who've gone through that. But Little Red Lie is much more about a much greater social phenomenon. I think it's about things that we're not really talking about, things that we're around conversations are just sort of starting.
Very cool. So what platforms will Little Red Light be available on?
Well, that will be definitely initially for PC, and then kind of based on where it goes, I'm just going to kind of take it from there. But PC will definitely be its base platform, and then wherever I can make it grow or feel it'll fit in, I'll take it there for sure.
Very cool. Well, Mr. O'Neill, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. Now, for the folks at home, where can they follow you on Twitter?
At Will O'Neill, WILLONEILL, and that's my Twitter. So please do follow me there. That's definitely where I communicate about everything I'm doing in terms of my games and new stuff I've got coming out. That's the best place.
Very cool. Well, I hope you enjoy your actual sunlight over in Toronto. I'm just going to chill out on this very rainy day. Folks, go check out Mr. O'Neill's game. It is absolutely fantastic. It's a rather sad experience, but ultimately it is one I do believe is worth having. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.